This is the story of how my wife fucked her coworker, and when I found out, she tried to ruin my reputation in life. My name is James, and if you'd asked me yesterday, I would have said my marriage to Emily was solid. Not perfect, but solid. We've been married for 8 years, and like every couple, we've had our ups and downs. Still, I always thought we had trust, an unspoken understanding that we'd never cross certain lines. This weekend was supposed to be about getting away from it all. Emily had suggested the trip to her family's cabin, saying we both needed a break from the chaos of work and life in general. I agreed, it sounded nice. Some fresh air, no Wi-Fi, and time to reconnect. The drive started out fine. Emily had packed sandwiches, snacks, and even her favorite thermos of coffee. She was scrolling through her phone as I drove, her usual habit, though it did annoy me sometimes. I wanted to talk, to use the drive as a chance to chat, but I didn't push it. Instead, I focused on the road, humming along to the playlist she'd put on. About an hour in, the first strange thing happened. Emily's phone buzzed, and I caught her glancing at it. Her expression shifted, just for a second, but enough for me to notice. She quickly tilted the screen away from me, then locked it and placed it face down on her lap. "Everything okay?" I asked casually. "Yeah, just a work thing," she said, her voice a little too light. "Nothing important." I didn't press her, but something about the way she answered made my stomach tighten. Emily's usually an open book, and that moment of secrecy felt out of character. But I brushed it off, convincing myself I was imagining things. We stopped at a gas station about 30 minutes later. While Emily went inside to grab snacks, I stayed by the car, stretching my legs. Her phone buzzed again, this time on the passenger seat. I wasn't trying to snoop, I really wasn't. But the screen lit up and my eyes caught the preview. It was a text from someone named Chris. It read, "Looking forward to tonight. Hope he doesn't suspect anything." My stomach dropped. The message burned in my mind, even as the screen went dark. Tonight? Hope I don't suspect anything? What the hell was that supposed to mean? And who was Chris? I didn't have time to think about it. Emily came back, a bag of chips and 2 sodas in hand, her smile as bright as ever. "Ready to go?" she asked, handing me a drink. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I got back in the car, my mind racing. As we drove, I tried to piece it together. Was it a joke? A misunderstanding? Or was it exactly what it looked like? I glanced over at Emily, who was cheerfully unwrapping a granola bar. How could she look so calm? "Who's Chris?" I asked suddenly, the words spilling out before I could stop them. She froze, the granola bar halfway to her mouth. "What?" "I saw a text on your phone," I said, keeping my voice steady. "From someone named Chris. He's looking forward to tonight. Care to explain?" Her eyes darted to me, wide with something that looked like panic. But then she laughed, a forced, nervous laugh. "Oh, Chris, he's just a coworker. We've been working on this big project, and he likes to joke around. That's all." I didn't respond right away, letting the silence hang between us. She fidgeted with the wrapper in her hands, her knuckles turning white. It was a terrible lie, and we both knew it. "Funny," I said after a moment, "because it doesn't sound like a joke. It sounds like something I should be concerned about." Her smile faltered. "James, come on, you're reading too much into it." "Am I?" asked, glancing at her. "Then why does he think I might suspect something?" Her face went pale, and for the first time, she didn't have an answer. The silence in the car was deafening, broken only by the soft hum of the engine. My grip on the steering wheel tightened, my knuckles aching from the pressure. "Emily," I said, my voice low and controlled, "tell me the truth. Who is Chris, and what's going on?" She opened her mouth as if to speak, but quickly closed it again. Her eyes darted to the phone on her lap, and I saw her thumb hovering over the screen. She looked like she wanted to delete something, to hide whatever secrets she was keeping, but it was too late for that. "Hand me the phone," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. She hesitated, clutching it tighter. "James, please, now." Her hand trembled as she handed it over, and I unlocked the screen. My heart pounded as I opened the message thread with Chris. The messages were worse than I imagined. Flirty texts, late-night confessions, plans to meet. The latest message confirmed it all. "The cabin will be perfect. Can't wait to finally have you all to myself." I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. The cabin. Our cabin. The place we'd spent years making memories. She wasn't just betraying me. She was bringing it into my sanctuary. "Pull over," she said suddenly, her voice trembling. "No," I said coldly, my eyes fixed on the road. "We're not pulling over. We're finishing this conversation, and you're going to tell me everything." Emily sat frozen in the passenger seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The cheerful energy she'd carried earlier in the day was gone, replaced by a tense, suffocating silence. I could feel her glancing at me, probably trying to figure out what to say. I didn't give her the chance. "Start talking," I said, my voice sharp and controlled. "Who is he? How long has this been going on?" Her shoulders sagged, and she looked away out the window. "James," she started, her voice trembling, "it's not what you think." "Don't," I snapped, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. "Don't insult me with that line. I saw the messages, Emily. The plans, the sneaking around. Just tell me the truth." Her silence stretched, the tension in the car growing unbearable. Finally, she sighed, her voice barely above a whisper. Chris is someone I've been seeing. The words hung in the air, and for a moment I thought I'd misheard her. But the way she hunched her shoulders, the way she couldn't meet my eyes, it confirmed everything. Seeing, I repeated, my voice low and dangerous. You mean cheating, right? Let's call it what it is. She flinched, but didn't argue. It wasn't supposed to happen, she said, her words spilling out in a rush. I didn't plan this. I never wanted to hurt you. You didn't plan it? I laughed bitterly. Emily, this wasn't an accident. You made plans. You sent him texts. You brought him to our cabin. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy, not this time. It just happened, she said weakly. We were working late, and he started being so kind, so attentive. I felt, I don't know, seen. I know that doesn't excuse it, but James, I've felt so distant from you lately. So this is my fault? I interrupted, my voice rising. You cheat on me and somehow I'm to blame? No, that's not what I'm saying, she cried, her tears now streaming down her face. I've been feeling so lost. Like we've been drifting apart for months and I didn't know how to fix it. I shook my head, my jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. And your solution was to sleep with someone else? Her silence was answer enough. We drove in tense silence for several minutes, the cabin now only a short distance away. My mind raced with thoughts, memories of our life together flashing like a cruel slideshow. All the times I thought we were happy, all the moments I believed she loved me. Had any of it been real? I turned down the long dirt road leading to the cabin, the trees casting shadows across the windshield. When the cabin came into view, it felt like a mockery. The place where we'd built so many memories was now tainted by her betrayal. I parked the car and turned to her, my voice cold and steady. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to call him, right now, and you're going to tell him it's over. Her eyes widened in panic. James, please. Now, Emily, I said firmly, tossing her phone into her lap. She stared at it like it was a grenade, her hands trembling. I can't, she whispered. You will, I said, my anger boiling over. Because if you don't, I'll do it myself. I'll call him and I'll tell him exactly what kind of person you are. Or better yet, I'll let his wife know because I'm sure someone like him has one. Her head snapped up, her face pale. Don't, she begged. Please don't ruin his life. He has kids. I laughed bitterly. Oh, so now you care about someone else's family? Funny, you didn't seem to care about ours. She swallowed hard, her hands shaking as she unlocked the phone. Her fingers hovered over the screen for a moment before she finally found his contact. I watched as she brought the phone to her ear, her eyes full of tears. When he answered, her voice cracked. Chris, it's me. We can't do this anymore. I can't see you again. I didn't hear what he said, but the look on her face told me enough. She whispered a shaky goodbye and ended the call, her hand falling limply into her lap. Happy? She asked, her voice bitter and broken. No, I said, opening the door and stepping out of the car. I'll never be happy again because of what you've done. I stood there outside the car, the cool air biting at my skin as I stared at the cabin, the weight of everything crushing me. Emily sat inside, motionless, her phone still clutched in her lap. I couldn't even look at her. Every moment of our life together felt like a cruel joke. But as I stood there, something caught my attention. A car pulling up the dirt road. Its headlights cut through the trees, illuminating the path, and for a second, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. Then I saw him. Chris stepped out of the car, his silhouette tall and unmistakable. He wore a smug grin, his confidence almost nauseating. He didn't even try to hide the fact that he was here, like he had every right to be. Are you kidding me? I muttered, the anger in my chest flaring into a full-blown inferno. Emily got out of the car, her face draining of color as she saw him. What is he doing here? She whispered, panic rising in her voice. That's your question? I snapped. You tell me, Emily. You're the one who invited him into our lives. Chris approached us, his hands casually in his pockets, like this was some casual meetup, and not the most humiliating moment of my life. Emily, he said smoothly, his voice oozing charm. You didn't respond to my texts. I got worried. Worried? I barked, taking a step toward him. You're worried? You show up here to my cabin after blowing up my marriage and you're worried? He looked at me then, his expression calm, almost amused. Look, man, I didn't come here to start trouble. You are trouble. I cut him off, my fists clenched at my sides. You think you can just show up and act like nothing's wrong? You've got some nerve. Emily stepped between us, her voice trembling. Chris, you need to leave. Now. He ignored her, his gaze locked on me. I think we need to have a conversation, man to man. Man to man? I laughed bitterly. You're no man. A real man wouldn't sneak around with another guy's wife. That finally wiped the grin off his face. He stepped closer, his posture stiffening. Watch your mouth, he said, his voice low and threatening. Before I could stop myself, I lunged at him, grabbing the front of his shirt and shoving him back against his car. The sound of his body hitting the metal echoed through the trees, and for a moment, all I could see was red. James, stop! Emily screamed, grabbing my arm, but I shook her off. You think you're better than me? I snarled, my face inches from his. You think you can just take what you want and walk away? Chris shoved me back, his strength catching me off guard, and I stumbled slightly. This isn't about you, he yelled. You weren't giving her what she needed. Don't blame me because you couldn't keep her happy. That did it. I swung, my fist connecting with his jaw. He staggered back, clutching his face, and for a second I thought he might fall. But then he steadied himself, his eyes blazing with anger. He charged at me, and we collided, our bodies hitting the ground hard. The fight was messy, raw, and fueled by pure rage. I didn't care about the dirt or the pain. All I cared about was making him feel the betrayal he'd brought into my life. Stop it! Emily screamed, her voice cracking. Both of you, stop! She tried to pull us apart, but we were too far gone. Chris landed a punch to my ribs, and I retaliated with a blow to his shoulder, knocking him off balance. Finally, headlights flooded the scene as another car pulled up. I barely registered the sound of a door slamming before someone grabbed me from behind, pulling me off Chris. James, stop! A familiar voice shouted. It was Emily's brother, Mark. His expression was a mix of shock and anger as he held me back. What the hell is going on here? Ask your sister, I spat, my chest heaving. She's the one who started this mess. Mark turned to Emily, his face hardening. Emily, what's he talking about? She looked at the ground, her hands trembling. I messed up, she admitted, her voice barely audible. Messed up? Mark repeated, his voice rising. You've got your husband and some stranger brawling outside the family cabin, and that's all you have to say? Chris staggered to his feet, wiping blood from his lip. I'm not a stranger, he muttered. Shut up, Mark snapped, stepping toward him. You need to get in your car and leave before I make you regret ever coming here. Chris looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Mark's tone stopped him. He glared at me one last time before getting in his car and driving off, the sound of his tires kicking up gravel, fading into the night. Mark turned back to Emily, his disappointment written all over his face. You need to fix this, Emily. You need to figure out what you want and stop dragging everyone else into your mess. He didn't wait for her response. Instead, he turned to me and said, Come on, James, let's go inside. I hesitated, my anger still burning, but I followed him. Emily stayed outside, her silhouette barely visible in the dim light. For the first time in my marriage, I wasn't sure if I wanted to fight for her anymore, and judging by the look on her face, neither was she. Once inside the cabin, I sat down heavily on the worn-out couch, my chest still heaving from the fight. Mark handed me a glass of water, his expression unreadable. You okay? He asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. I don't even know, I muttered, taking a sip. Your sister, I don't even know who she is anymore. Mark ran a hand through his hair and sighed. I've known Emily my whole life, and even I'm not sure what's going on with her these days. She's been different. Different, I echoed bitterly. That's putting it lightly. Before he could respond, the door creaked open and Emily walked in. Her face was red from crying, but her eyes were hard, sharp, in a way I'd never seen before. She didn't look remorseful. She looked angry. So this is how it's going to be, she said, her voice cold. You're going to humiliate me in front of my brother and make me look like the bad guy? I stared at her in disbelief. Humiliate you? You're the one who cheated, Emily. You're the one who brought him here. What part of this is anyone's fault but yours? She crossed her arms and scoffed. Oh, come on, James. Don't act like you're some perfect victim. You've been neglecting me for years, always working late, always acting like you have more important things to do than spend time with your wife. That's your excuse? I shot back. I worked hard to give us a good life, Emily, to make sure we had everything we needed. And this is how you repay me? She rolled her eyes, her coldness cutting through me like a blade. You were never there. Not really. So don't act surprised that I found someone who actually pays attention to me. Mark stood up, his jaw tight. Emily, enough. You've done enough damage for one night. But she wasn't done, not even close. You know what? She said, her voice rising. Maybe I do deserve someone better. Someone who doesn't treat me like a roommate or a burden. Someone who actually makes me feel alive. I stood up, my fists clenched at my sides. If that's how you feel, then why are you still here? Why not run off with Chris and live your perfect little fantasy? Her lips curled into a cruel smile. Because I'm not stupid, James. You think I'm gonna give up everything we've built so easily? The house, the savings, all the things you worked so hard for? I've earned my share of that life, whether you like it or not. I felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. The woman standing in front of me wasn't the Emily I married. She wasn't even someone I recognized. You can't be serious, I said, my voice low. Oh, I'm dead serious, she replied, her tone dripping with venom. You want a divorce? Fine, but don't think for a second that I'm walking away empty-handed. Mark stepped between us, his face pale with shock. Emily, stop. You're making this worse. She shrugged, brushing past him. I'm just being honest, Mark. Something James here should have tried for once in his life. The room fell into an uneasy silence, her words hanging in the air like poison. I stared at her, my heart pounding, a mix of anger and heartbreak twisting in my chest. Go to hell, Emily, I said finally, my voice shaking. She smirked, grabbing her coat from the back of a chair. See you in court, James. Don't think for a second I won't fight for what I deserve. With that, she walked out, slamming the door behind her. Mark turned to me, his face full of disbelief. I'm sorry, man. I don't even know what to say. I sank back onto the couch, the weight of everything crashing down on me. You don't have to say anything, I muttered. She's made it clear who she really is. But even as I said the words, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Emily wasn't going to let this end quietly. She was going to drag me through the mud, and she wasn't going to stop until she'd taken everything. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't just fighting for my dignity. I was fighting for my future. Mark stayed for a while, trying to console me, but there wasn't much he could say to undo the damage Emily had done. After a while, he left, promising to check in on me later. I sat alone in the cabin, staring at the cold fireplace, the silence deafening. Emily's words echoed in my mind, her cruelty, her smugness, the way she twisted everything to make herself look like the victim. The next few days were a blur. Emily hadn't come back to the cabin, which was a relief, but the texts and emails started almost immediately. At first, she sent messages that seemed apologetic, but they quickly turned venomous when I didn't respond. You're being immature, James. At least have the decency to discuss things like an adult. Fine, if you want to play the silent game, I'll just talk to my lawyer. Don't expect this to go your way. And then the kicker. I know things about you, James. Don't think I won't use them if I have to. I stared at that last message for a long time, a cold knot forming in my stomach. What could she possibly mean by that? I had nothing to hide. At least nothing I could think of. But Emily was crafty, manipulative. If she wanted to twist something, she'd find a way. A few days later, I got a call from my boss. James, we need to talk, he said, his tone clipped. What's going on? I asked, my chest tightening. I just got off the phone with someone claiming to have information about you. They said you've been stealing from the company. What? I exclaimed, my voice rising. That's insane. I know, James, he interrupted. Your record's spotless, and I don't believe it for a second. But this person was persistent. They're saying they have proof. I had to report it to HR just to cover our bases. My heart sank. Do you know who it was? There was a long pause. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but they called themselves Emily. I froze, gripping the phone so tightly I thought it might crack. You're kidding me, I said through gritted teeth. I'm afraid not, he said. Look, I trust you, but HR will need to investigate. Just keep your head down, and we'll get through this. When I hung up, I was shaking with rage. This wasn't just a messy divorce anymore. Emily was actively trying to destroy my life. She wasn't satisfied with taking the house, the money, or my dignity. Now, she wanted to ruin my career. I decided then and there that I wasn't going to let her win. I called my lawyer and laying everything out on the table. The texts, the messages, the lies, everything. He listened carefully, his tone growing more serious as I explained the situation. James, this is more than just a divorce, he said finally. She's crossing into harassment and defamation. If she keeps this up, we can file charges against her. Do it, I said without hesitation. I don't care what it takes. I'm not letting her destroy my life. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal battles. Emily made good on her threats, dragging my name through the mud every chance she got. She told mutual friends that I was abusive, that I'd cheated on her, that I'd neglected her emotionally and financially. Some of them believed her. Others saw through her lies. But the worst came when I got a call from my mother. James, I just got the strangest call from Emily, she said, her voice trembling. What did she say? I asked, dreading the answer. She told me you've been hiding money from her, my mom said. That you've been funneling it into a secret account and planning to leave her with nothing. That's a lie, I said immediately. I know, sweetheart, my mom replied, but she's convincing. You need to be careful. That was the moment I realized Emily wasn't just angry. She was dangerous. She was willing to lie, manipulate, and destroy anything in her path to get what she wanted. I started digging into her past, determined to find something I could use against her. It didn't take long. My lawyer discovered that Emily had been funneling money from our joint accounts into a separate one for months. Not only that, but she'd used those funds to pay for luxury items, trips, and even a deposit on a new apartment, one she'd clearly been planning to move into with Chris. When I confronted her lawyer with the evidence, Emily's smug facade cracked. She tried to play the victim, claiming she was entitled to the money, but the evidence was damning. In the end, the court sided with me. Emily's attempts to paint me as the villain fell apart under scrutiny, and her lies only made her look worse. She walked away with nothing but the clothes on her back and the realization that her schemes had backfired spectacularly. The divorce was finalized a month later, and I felt like I could finally breathe again. Emily had tried to destroy me, but in the end, she only destroyed herself. I haven't heard from her since, and I hope I never do. For the first time in years, I feel free. Free from her manipulation, her lies, and the weight of a marriage that was built on sand. And you know what? It feels good.